Welcome to A Narrative of Love, a series of conversations with thinkers, leaders, and spiritual teachers about their understanding of love and how they see the significance of love in our personal and political lives. I'm Scherto Gill, and I'm your host of this conversation series. My guest today is Dr. Vandana Shiva, a most dynamic and provocative thinker, scientist, and activist who has dedicated her life's work to promoting biodiversity in agriculture and defending people's equitable access to nature's resources. In 1987, Dr. Shiva founded Navdanya to start saving seeds as an alternative to the corporations patenting genetically engineered seeds and using WTO to impose seed monopolies. As a thinker and a public intellectual, Dr. Shiva has contributed to nonviolent, compassionate, cooperative systems of knowledge, production, and consumption. Amongst her most influential books are Staying Alive, Earth Democracy, Soil, Not Oil, and Who Really Feeds the World. Welcome, Dr. Shiva. Or to begin, I wanted to say that you have traveled the earth tirelessly to offer messages about the importance of cultural and agricultural diversity, ecological integrity, and earth democracy. And many people would say that you are promulgating seeds of love. But why seeds of love? Why not seeds of liberation, seeds of truth, seeds of revolution? Why love?
Well, seeds of love, because love holds the truth and love holds true liberation. Because, we've been burdened with a very fragmented worldview over the last 400 or 500 years. It didn't evolve. It's not evolutionary. It was imposed. It's part of the building of empire on power, which then created an imagination and a vocabulary that actually dismissed love from the very possibility of our being human. And when this happened to agriculture, it created violence. And, I'm trained in quantum theory where non-separation is the reality we understand. And I dedicated myself to love in agriculture, love for seeds, after the 1984 violence of Punjab and farmers of India on the streets now for 3 months, but then too they were on the streets. And I wanted to understand. And that same year, a tragic, basically a death, genocide took place in Bhopal. And when I decided to study it more deeply, I realized that the roots of violence, whether it was Punjab or Bhopal, come from hate. The roots were in Hitler's Germany, totally based on hate, on extermination. And then the chemicals were created to exterminate people, and now they are agrochemicals. And for me, agriculture is an act of love for the earth, for people, for feeding people. And so seeds of love is the only kind of seeds that will bring us life.
Thank you. We will continue to explore the notion of love as this conversation goes. In various interviews, you talked about how you came to be a true custodian of our common heritage, the earth, and also all beings on the earth. And this is one of the books that really drew me to you. And I have noticed that you wrote the following words. Of course, this book was dedicated to your mother, but in the beginning, when you talk about the acknowledgement, you talk about your dad's name. How do you pronounce it? Rajuji.
Well, Rajuji wasn't his formal name. It was just the name my father called in love, and we just took it on.
But I want to say something. This is really interesting. You said, Rajuji, my father, who first mothered me, and then my son. And it really drew my attention to this sentence. You see, my father mothered me. And how did your father mother you and your child? And what you have learned from him about love? Of course, you could also talk about how you learned from your mother about love.
Well, my mother was a very inspiring person and was of the time where no woman was getting educated, where we were suffering from partition. She was a victim of the partition. And she became the person who studied highest in her own community and dedicated her life to learning. And it was a relationship of love between my parents. My father was a major in the British Army. And she said, I don't want you to be in the army. And he left for her love, to become a forest conservator. How did my father mother me? Because I think part of reductionism, which I've addressed in my book, Staying Alive, has been to reduce us to the exploitable functions. Even though we as human beings are spiritual beings, we are beings of integrity, we are related to other beings of integrity through love. And mothering is about caring, about loving. And my dad being a major in the British Army, did everything, stitching our clothes, understanding when we were hurt, and most important, I realized only when he was mothering my son how he had given us so much freedom through love. Because one day, my little boy did something, and I said, don't do that. And my father told me, never say no to a child. You just show the way of love to a child. A no doesn't change anybody, but example does. And unconditional love is all we can give our children. And then I realized he'd done that all his life for us. And he taught me to never say no to my son again and just shower my son with unconditional love.
Wow, that's so beautiful. In my own research about love, I came to the conclusion that it is really difficult to define love as a noun. What is it? What it is, what this, how do you define it? As a noun is very hard, but if you see love as a verb, it's captured in what you just said. Love is about valuing that child unconditionally, valuing the intrinsic nature in that child. And love is about relating or relationing, using the word of Humberto Maturana. But love is about caring. So if we use a verb, it's much better capturing the essence of love rather than trying to say talk about the word as a noun. Now, let's look at your work. Your work is so diverse, and you have so many titles, and you have inspired so many projects, programs, and organizations, and so on. Which has been the most important aspect of your work? Take them as a whole. Take all these projects as a whole. And what has given you the greatest joy? So tell us about the work you're doing.
All my work is rooted in caring deeply for the earth, loving her deeply, and therefore never letting harm come to her. And so I rise. When I see harm, when I join my sisters in the mountains, and the book Staying Alive, the publisher heard me at the Women's Summit in Nairobi. And she said, Vandana, the story has to be told. And I said, I've just chucked an academic job and I am no more publisher. And because I had got fed up with the rat race. And she said, but, writing can be a very subversive activity. And so I decided to tell the story of my love for the earth, which is staying alive, my love for life, my deep passion for life. Because part of what has been exiled is life itself. I mean, if you just look, and, I'm trained as a scientist. And I've had to deal, even though I'm trained in a physics that is about non-separation, most of the sciences are shaped by Cartesian science. And because I love life so deeply, as you said, love is a verb. It's a relationship. Only the objectification of life and denial of life transforms it into an object that someone else will try and define for you. When does it exist and when does it not exist? But when it's a relationship, those in the relationship know exactly where love is the connection. And for me, another name for love is compassion, to feel the passion of the other. And I believe now that I've studied nature enough, outside quantum theory, now I studied life in living systems, I realized that what connects life to is love. The microorganism is giving love to the plant. The bee is giving love to the flower. And when you start to see these relationships of life as unconditional giving and nurturance and loving, you suddenly realize not only the power and creativity in nature and the interactions between nature, but you also realize how trivial the mindset is that want to cause harm, to disrupt these relationships. Another part of my learning over many years is that when there is unconditional love, there's unconditional trust. And there is no trust in a manipulated world because you've got to constantly manipulate. And when a violent patriarchy starts to treat women as objects, then femicide explodes. And look at the number of women being killed. Look at the number of women being raped. Because that is a love that thinks it is love, but is not. It's about domination and control. And there's a huge confusion about this kind of possessiveness of the other as an object to be possessed. And when the person is not an object, they are a being, then there's violence. How dare you not be my possession? So if you look at all of the problems we face, they're coming from a blindness to love, denial of love, and a fear of love.
Yeah. There's so many threads I would like to pick up from just this very brief articulation of your work. First of all, let's just touch upon this idea of non-dualistic thinking. You often talk about the non-dualistic nature, an aspect of nature, but the oneness in this case is almost like the oneness cannot be perceived by the minds. It only can serve to categorize things. The oneness can only be experienced in love.
So the world, in reality, is a beautifully interconnected world. And it's interconnected through many, many layers. It's interconnected through consciousness, which is why we are spiritual beings in human form. But the plants outside my window are spiritual beings in plant form. But the plant of the lychee is in lychee form, and the tree of the mango is in mango form. They are just different expressions of one spiritual interconnected consciousness in the world. And because I've studied quantum theory, we realize that, the particles in the world are really not the basic reality. The basic reality is potential and energy. And it's only when you try and measure it, then it shows up as a particle or it shows up as a wave. But the reality really is that which connects, the non-separability problem. My PhD thesis was on non-separation, non-locality in quantum theory. I mean, we knew 100 years ago in physics. And yet an obsolete physics of more than 100 years ago is being used to shape and divide a very interconnected world. So dualism today is not just epistemologically so wrong. It is not just ontologically so wrong. It is spiritually just not the right way to think of the world, but it is now becoming a threat to human life. Yeah? Preventing people from living with each other in diversity with love. And that's why we have to spread the message of non-dualism, of interconnectedness, of oneness through love. And we have to be the practice. There's no, as my dad told me when he mothered me and mothered my son, he said, just be the practice of love and the lessons of love and doing the right thing. That's the beauty, that love, because it's not an external coercion. It's an inner expression of your being. It unfolds into, it's inspired by love, but it then starts to nourish the other through the unconditional love.
I'm going to, I want to connect this with what you talk about, the nurturing, where you also talk about the fact that you learn huge amount from women, whether they're peasants, farmers, tribal women, or others. And the last year I was in Panchgani, just outside of Mumbai, and there was a local village there. They was celebrating their very first female chief in its history. So I asked this woman, I said, what convinced the villagers to vote for her? And then she said, my sort of a major pledge is that I would take care of the village in the same way I look after my own family. And so that says a lot about all the qualities you mentioned, that the nurturing, the relational, and so on and so forth, the more to that. So clearly, women's leadership contains within it a very, very different kind of quality. And so probably you could touch upon what those qualities are. But my question is this: structurally, how might these qualities that you know too well, you captured in the book, and these women embody in their everyday life, how that structurally, how might these qualities be nurtured? And what difference would a feminine approach to democracy make to the global politics today? When I say feminine approach, I don't mean that just women. I mean those kind of approach that carrying these kind of qualities.
So, nurturing is caring, nurturing is mothering. And I was once with Alice Walker at an ecology festival. And she used a very beautiful phrase, She said, we've created an ecological crisis, and now we must mother Mother Earth. So nurturing is the quality of A, realizing oneness, right? 2, realizing that the other is not a dualistic other, that the other is a sentient other, a spiritual other, and therefore not another. Just separation in form, but oneness in interconnection. And that oneness in interconnectedness creates the imperative of nurturance. And when you love deeply enough, you know deeply enough what the quality of nurturance is. Yeah. So, because of saving seeds of love, I've created a whole biodiversity center. And for me, the biggest joy is just watching every day, everything flourish. All we do is give the nurturance. Women bring to governance and democracy an authentic democracy. If you look around you, the democracy based on managing others, on dualism, on divide and rule, is a very dead democracy that is not allowing people to live their lives through love, for love. They are forcing people into insecurity, into fear, into hate. And the quality of nurturance that has been kept alive, it's like an ember in a dying fire, yeah? It's there, and we can light another fire. How will we replicate this? We will replicate it by realizing that representative democracy driven by money, guided by love for power, cannot take care of the earth in this period of collapse. It cannot hold broken societies together. It cannot nurture oneness. So we have to shift from exclusive dependence on power-driven, power-hungry representative politics to participatory democracy, where you live the freedom. And I have called this earth democracy and living democracy that grows from living beings, spiritual beings, and shines the light of oneness on each other. And the thread that connects us is love.
And clearly your work is by nature activism, and you take a truly non-violent approach. So would you just say more about that? In a sense that probably quantum theory has something to contribute to that, but equally you talk about your work is a spiritually inspired activism. Now, how do people pay attention to the genesis of their activism, so that they don't fall into that trap of antagonism and aggression?
If I love the earth enough, if I love my immediate, proximate family and community enough, and through that love humanity enough, then what I will do is seek ways in which nonviolent power grows. Because a violent system does not care. And the violent system will always have big instruments of violence, big instrument, which is why Gandhi said, not only is it a spiritual imperative to be nonviolent, but he said, in any way, it's the most efficient thing to do against a brutal regime, where you take away and withdraw your consent. That is what he calls satyagraha, the power of truth. And the power of truth comes from the power of love and nonviolence. And love and nonviolence are the same thing. Again, if you treat it as a word and you say it's the absence of violence, then what's the violence and what's the absence? And you get into all of that. But when you know, and through experience, what the violence is, the nonviolence then is both a deep knowledge. I'm an activist, but I'm an activist also as a scientist. Yeah. If I have had to challenge the GMOs, it's the scientist in me who was feeling violated. I said, no, I can see that the bees need the flower, and a toxic flower will kill the bees. I know that the organisms in the soil feed the plant, and if the root is leaching a Bt toxin, the organisms will die. And so not only did I try and create regulations, but I worked on the science of it, including with scientists who know molecular biology. But I did soil ecology. I worked with PhD. I guided a PhD student on pollinators in the Bt cotton fields. And that comes from a passion for truth. And a truth in a living world is the truth of living and interconnectedness. And because life itself is an expression of consciousness that unites us all, we have a very beautiful, one of our most famous Upanishads is called the Isha Upanishad. And its first stanza says, we live in one interconnected universe. Enjoy its gifts without greed. Yeah. So it says, it's not saying punish yourself, deprive yourself. It's not doing with so much of the Cartesian thinking of I've got to defend this, I've got to defend that. No, enjoy the gifts, but put a limit on greed. And once you put a limit on greed and shift to what is really needed, then all kinds of spiritual traditions grow. When I started to work with my sisters in the mountains, they'd go to the forest. Of course, they took the wood. They took the fodder. And I remember they took off their slippers one day. And I said, did you get a thorn? Of your footwear when you got a thorn? They said, no, we took off our footwear to pray to the forest goddess, to tell her we need to depend on her. We need to take a little fodder and fuel wood to sustain our families and our animals and our farms, and apologize to her for that harm, but within the limits, and commit ourselves to never take more than we need. That is regulating greed. And this antagonism is created partly through ignorance, partly through, I call this being the atlas, yeah? And I always say, you're not an atlas carrying the world on your shoulder. We are one among billions and trillions of beings being carried by the earth, connected through love. So don't overcarry your burden in the illusion that it all depends on you. So a lot of unnecessary dissipative energy is put there through mimicking the oppressor in terms of power. Yeah? There's a power that dominates, a power that's destroying. Now I must be equally powerful. No, you'll never, ever, ever be the change you want to see if you replicate all the negative tendencies that have brought the world to a crisis and humanity to a crisis. And I would finally say on this, I've had to have 3 or 4 sessions in just the last few weeks on burnout among activists. Yeah? And I begin by saying, hey, we are not non-renewable energy. We are the amazing energy of the universe. And being part of it, being fully aware that we're part of it, allows that energy to renew itself in us all the time, all the time, all the time. We don't get depleted through service. We get energized through service. Love cannot ever leave you exhausted. It always leaves you exhaustless.
That's beautiful. Wow. That's a great wisdom. If we work from love, we won't exhaust ourselves. Have you thought about, so far I haven't read any form of viable alternative that can replace the current economic system, capitalism, put it that way. And there are commons approach and so on, but these are grassroots. So what would a new economic system look like?
Okay, I think the emerging economic system is a combination of economies of love that are still thriving. When we talked about the women continuing to nurture, that's an economy. All cultures had economies, but it wasn't the first organizing principle. It was a byproduct of good living. And think of the fact, you talked about your own ancestors. Think about the fact, remote Himalayan villages, few terraces, or the nomads dressed in the most amazing turquoise. And, where did that wealth come from? It was an economy, but it was not an economy of extraction. It was not an economy of domination. It was an economy of living well. So if you go to the roots of the word economy, economia, according to Aristotle, is the art of living. Yeah. Our civilization has very deep spiritual foundations. And through spirituality, you know that the diversity in the world is really different expressions of the same oneness. And therefore, no one got stuck with fighting this diversity over that diversity. And it was always a play. Lalita, the divine goddess, the one who plays. 1,000 names. 1,000 names of the river. You know, the Lalita Sahasranam, it's sitting right here on my desk. Yeah? Ganga, 1,000 names. We never settled for one and then dissecting its meaning. We said, no, let all the beings flourish and let all the names flourish. And let us focus on the flourishing and the love and not get stuck on how you objectify to name. So we need to come back to economy as the art of living. And, you know, if the lockdown hadn't happened, I was going to, for Pope Francis, be part of a mega conference on the economy of St. Francis, who said it's only in the art of giving you receive. And in a way, it's the economy of love. So there are many trends growing. The recovery of the commons is one aspect of it. And just like one aspect of the Ganga is that she flows rapidly. Yeah. But there are other places where she flows still. So I think the different ingredients being recovered in the industrial colonizing West, they're still surviving in the colonized South. And we've got to create multiple vocabularies and narratives to make all of this come together. Not in uniformity and one monoculture, one system, and you got to belong to it. No, let thousands of systems flourish with 2 or 3 qualities shared. The quality of giving, the quality of loving, the quality of sharing, the quality of oneness. And as long as that's there, that's the alternative.
Yeah. Can we have an antidote to GDP? And you each time you always say women have the knowledge. They know, but that will be discounted in a system of measurement, and the stories will illustrate the growth, the development, the flourishing, and that will be dismissed in the system of measurement. So what is the antidote? We know these things count, but how do we bring these things to systems so that, you know, we are completely enslaved, chained by the system of measurement?
So I want to keep my senses alive. Indian epistemology never devalued the senses. The 5 senses were part of epistemology, a part of knowing. Then there is about knowledge itself. But higher than knowledge is knowing the good and bad. That is the valuation you're talking about. What is right and what is wrong. Not in an objectified, positivistic way of third-party philosophers dissecting, but how the goodness and badness of the right action and the wrong action fit into the relationship of the web of life that holds things together. Rita, the right action. Rita, the right action is not a Cartesian measure. Rita, the right action is a relationship of care, of multiple relationships of care, multiple relationships of love. And this is called Vigyan Kosh, the true knowledge. And when you have this, then of course you relate to the universe, to the cosmic universe, through deep joy and deep bliss. And I think, given that this civilization of which I'm a part has given so much, and right now I watch how it's being suppressed. I watch how Ayurveda is being suppressed. I watch how indigenous food is being made criminal. And this is a part of work I do. And on this Women's Day, we are going to release a beautiful, beautiful declaration of Earth Rising and Women Rising to heal the world and heal ourselves. And look out for it. I'll send you a copy when it's done. But we are at this moment where the best of knowing nonviolence and love is being suppressed by the worst of dominating power. And right now, we have to have confidence in our love.
Thank you. That's beautifully said. If economy is, according to Aristotle, is about love of living, so more fundamentally, what we should focus on is not how and what we should measure or evaluate, but instead is about what kind of life should we collectively desire and how we make live that flourishing life, or how we can explore that art of living a flourishing life together. I want to connect Navdanya and the seeds of love to what's really important in the here and now, is an empowerment of people, and especially the empowerment of a younger generation. What can we do? What can we say to young people? That there is a seed of this. Really, when we plant the seeds of love, the first place to plant is in the hearts and the soul of the younger generation. So I'd really love to hear your advice.
Yeah, I think, when I started Navdanya, I was overwhelmed by listening to the corporations who had brought us chemicals, who had worked for Hitler, the IG Farben, and they were now talking about owning the seed through patents and genetic engineering and the GATT and the WTO. And it was overwhelming. And I went back to our freedom struggle. I thought of what Gandhi had done. He had pulled out a spinning wheel. No one was spinning then. Everyone had forgotten how to spin. And he asked an old woman to teach him how to spin. And he taught a whole nation how to spin for freedom. And when I was thinking of what can I do, I said, what would be the spinning wheel of today at this time where corporations want to own life as if it's their invention? I said, the seed will be the spinning wheel. And that's how Navdanya started. And at that point for me, it was, if I can save one seed, that's it. Because that one seed will be free of that imagination of domination. It will hold within it the imagination of love. And therefore, it will be a seed of love. But the beauty of seed is you save one, it's going to give you 10. And you save 10, it's going to give you 100. And it's just multiplicative. And the same is with the metaphorical seeds of love in terms of our relationships with each other. That the more they spread, the more they grow. And because everyone is in need, if it's not with a top-down preachiness of the missionary zeal, which has been a problem with so much activism, where a lot of people think, if only I could convince, and a lot of young people ask me the question, what should I tell so-and-so? I said, don't tell anyone anything. Just do it, Be the change you want to see. And that's why for me, even one plant in a balcony where you're saving seeds is already the change. But not in isolation, but by constantly communicating with those around you. And that's why, again, I love the fact that, why is there a sacred basil in every home? And what's the prayer for the sacred basil? To say, I'm a small person, but you embody the cosmos. And I promise I will take care of you. In my imagination, knowing that you are connected to everything and I'm connected to everything, that in my caring, I am doing my bit for the larger world. And coming back again to another very important teaching from India, the Gita, which says your duty is to engage in the right action, not in calculating what the consequence is. Because a lot of people, we've got so much into the measurement mode, we've got so much into measuring, and all of the, the accounting training is impact assessment, outcome, and I feel very sad because they're driving the indirect consequences to be the center stage, and they're excluding love again. We have to be citizens of where we are, and be absolutely alert and engaging, which is where the issue of governance comes in. And then we are Earth citizens, and we have to shift the thinking from the global players being the greed of corporations to the planetary players being Earth citizens working in harmony through love and releasing and unleashing power in loving and creative form.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. It's such an honor to be hearing your stories